summer, we're wrestling with a simple question: what does it mean to be human? We have lost track of that. And part of my goal in bringing that question up was when the staff, we spend quite a bit of time, you don't know this, but in January we do an offsite where we really analyze down deep what's going on in our church, and we analyze what's going on in our culture right here. Okay, right here. You can read books about New York City and Chicago and Florida and all those places, but we know our people here. We got a lot of challenges here. Did you know last census, only 7% of our county professed to be Protestant, not even evangelical? So it's a wonder to me. It makes me smile when I see all of you sitting here. And so we do a lot of work, and so we realize that as we head into this election year, we're pretty honest, not going to lie to you, okay? When you walk through those doors, you're not Republican or Democrat. I don't care what you are, you're a Christian. And so, but I see the fracture lines. We've been talking about that, and we have to be especially careful that we don't let those divide our church. So we started wrestling with the question of what does it mean to be human, because the world has lost track of that. They have no idea how to answer that question. All you have to do is look on social media, and you can see that for sure. So we've been wrestling with that all summer, and my approach has been the best way to figure out who you are is to look at who Jesus is, to look at who God is. I've used this metaphor many times. A.W. Tozer said if you could look in God's eyes, you'd see them twinkling with delight as he looks back at you. And because he made you. He loves you. In fact, this fall, Rob and I were talking, we're going to jump into Philippians and we're going to change the nature of the talk just a little bit. Rather than asking the question, what does it mean to be human? I want to talk about the joy of being human. And where does that joy come from? And what actually fills you with joy? Believe it or not, it's not the riches. It's not significance. It's not fame. Okay, we have somebody sitting right here, a whole group that understands celebrity status, but I guarantee you, Hazel will tell you it's more about the Lord than it is about status, right? Yeah. And so we're going to talk that through. What does that mean? So we've been wrestling with that, and we've been focusing on one Hebrew word which is captured all throughout the Old Testament. It's the Hebrew word chesed. Doesn't mean anything to you, but I'm getting you used to it by having you say it every week. Just say chesed. Yeah, it's a fun word to say. You kind of gutturalize it, chesed, like that. Okay, it's translated in your Bibles often loving kindness in the Old Testament. Okay, and really what it means is it's a word that's very, very big. It's fairly unique to Israel's culture. We don't have any of the writings anywhere of the gods around the world back then that talk about this type of love. And it's a love that God shows his people because, honestly, he made you. And so he commits himself to you like a good parent does. And so it has the idea of he's going to make a promise. He's going to make a covenant to love you. And you know what? He's going to follow through on it no matter what you do. As Paul says later on, though we are faithless, he remains faithful. And so we've taken this time. By now, hopefully those of you that have been here have realized how important this word is. It weaves its way through every part of what we call the Old Testament, Israel's culture. And it's the foundation for everything that he does, his love for us. That gets repeated in the New Testament. We'll look more about that this fall. So we talked about the law, the Torah. That's where we first looked, the first 5 books. And there we kind of answered the question with this chesed, who is he? That's where he says to Moses, remember the golden calf? Most of you know the story. If you grew up in any kind of church environment, they made the golden calf. So God says to Moses, you go on up to the promised land. I'm not going to go with you. And Moses says, please don't do that. Please don't do that. If we go up without you, how will anybody know that you're our God? And so God says to Moses these wonderful words, which we could say to every one of you, and I've done it, right? And he says, I will do what you ask, Moses, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. Well, you don't get that picture of God through the stereotypes of media, do you? You don't get that God. You don't even care. If you're not careful, you don't get that rendering of who God is just by reading the Old Testament. There seems to be a lot of judgment. There is. But woven through that with the faithful is this concept, I know you by name, pleased with you, and I know you by name. So the first 5 books give us this glimpse of who he is. And then from there, we kind of looked into the historical section. Those are the Kings and Chronicles and Samuel. And we find out what happens when you violate this concept of chesed, when you start hurting one another. Okay? By the way, who we are, we're created not only to receive and experience this chesed, this love from God that it never goes away, but then we're created to turn right around and display it. I told the missions committee, when we got missionaries in town, I'll bring them up here. That's my heartbeat. And because of your help, we get to keep our giving to missions above 20% of our general fund. That means a lot to me when in this country, the missions giving is declining fast. We're below 1% now, average on churches. I always want our church to stay as a minimum at that level. More, if we can do it. That's why I said, go to wherever it is on the front page. Oh, yeah. Go to that QR code. You can give to missions. You can give to food bank. The other day I was talking to Jude, and I look out the window. Food bank line all the way inside the church, all the way around the back and back up. That's how many cars we have of needy people in our county. Thank you. You guys are the ones that fund that. So we learned that when you violate this concept of chesed, you violate your very humanity. You violate the very core, the very essence of who you are and who you were made to be. And we saw that because the kings did it regularly. He did it regularly. We looked at Psalm 109 last week, a psalm of honest rage. David is so mad at one of his own cabinet because he extended chesed and they turned around and used it to steal from the poor. He could have taken care of it. But he remembered what God said in Exodus 34, that I will not let the guilty go unpunished. He could have dealt with it as a king. He could have had this guy executed. But he turned him over to the Lord and said, I'm going to let you deal with it. And that's a model for us, what it means to give that vengeance to God and see what he does with it. And then we looked into Psalms. In fact, that's what we did last week. And we learned what we were created for. It's our heartbeat. That's why when you see something wonderful happen, whether it's on social media, you don't see it a lot there because they like to report things that aren't good because they're trying to get, advertisers in the media. But when you see it happen, you just walk out and you see that perfect sunrise, the perfect sunset. Nancy and I were sailing yesterday. I just happened to glance up. It was a clear sky for a while, part of the time. One little tiny cloud was gold, golden orange. And it's like, I wonder how that happened. And you see these things. You see somebody care for another person. And just for a moment, you taste it. Just for a moment. You see, that's what the Psalms teach us. Our hearts are made for this type of love. Not only to receive it, but to give it. And I'm going to continue to challenge you as long as I'm your pastor. I want us to be known as a church that shows that kind of love. I don't personally care what your politics are. You want a good debate? Let's have coffee. I love debating. But when this county thinks about Dillon Community Church, what do you want them to think? I want them to think there's a church who really helps the poor. There's a church who provides mental health counseling right around the corner here for the people that need it. There's a church that has money set aside to really help poor people with their needs. There's a church that in the middle of a blizzard, when a car gets stuck, we can call Dillon Community Church. They'll put them up in a hotel. We'll take care of them. That's what I want them to think when they see us. There's a church that understands what it really means to love. I had a lady who occasionally writes for the newspaper say to me, got right in my face, she goes, I never knew that Christians thought about love, much less practiced it. And I said, and here you are, a reporter sitting in your office, have no idea what you're talking about. That's what I want us to be known for. So today we're going to look at Jeremiah. You see, in Jeremiah, we learn something different about this God, because in Jeremiah, we get to actually meet the person who We're talking about God in real life. A bunch of you have asked, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you. I've asked if Numbers is as exciting as Leviticus and Exodus, and the answer is absolutely. Guess what we're going to look at next spring? By the way, Numbers is not the Hebrew word given to the book. That was given later on. Because the 2 chapters have numbers. You have the first census, they all died, and the second census, they all lived. But in between that, you get a chance to see who God really is. It looks like this. If in a wedding ceremony, because it's laid out this way, if Exodus is the betrothal, the offering of the marriage, will you marry me? Okay? Then Leviticus are the vows. Just like in a wedding. Numbers is when you actually get into the marriage. And then you find out that your husband is crazier than you ever dreamed. So we're going to take a look at it. So in the prophets, we begin to get a glimpse of who this God is. So I titled the sermon today, Come Back, Come Back. Because that's in every prophet. God's pleading with his people, please come back. Please. So Jeremiah is very interesting. It's in Jeremiah 3:12 that we actually just get a glimpse. He says in Jeremiah 3:12, return, faithless Israel, declares the Lord. I will frown on you no longer, for I am faithful. Now here we translate the word chesed as faithful. You could say, because I'm committed, because I'm filled with loving kindness. I asked Rob to put the painting up here that Summer Ashley did, because it's a painting that captures an idea. We talked about that earlier. An idea. And what the prophets do is they give us a portrait, they give us a painting of who God is when we are rebellious. And let's don't hide it. We're rebellious. You guys are rebellious. Okay, I have to deal with you all week long. I know. So am I, for that matter. But he says, I am faithful. That's the reason. That's the reason, because I show chesed. I will not be angry forever. And so in the prophets, all the prophets, we've traveled 5 or 6 centuries long from David. All right? David is the one, he's the pinnacle of the Israelite nation, because his heart, he was a man after God's own heart. After that, it went straight downhill. Okay? It did. With Solomon. We learned from Solomon that all the wisdom in the world is not enough. Faithfulness has to be present too. And he finishes very poorly. We talked about that the last 2 weeks, actually, especially 2 weeks ago. And so we've traveled 5 or 6 centuries of a very grueling story of rebellion, disobedience. They're sacrificing their children in burnt offerings while they're alive. Okay? They set up idols all over the place. And here they have the richest, most wonderful, generous God there is to follow. All they have to do is turn to him, and they refuse to do it. So one of the questions I'm going to leave you with today is, what are you running from? Are you chasing after riches? Is that how you define success? I was honest with you last week. If your candidate wins in November, if your candidate loses, are you going to be angry at the other person next to you that is celebrating? Where is your real heart here when it comes to this idea of chesed? So we've gone 5 or 6 centuries, and so the prophets, they paint the portrait of the one, God, who relentlessly pursues his people, even his enemies. Nahum and Jonah are sent to the Assyrians, Nineveh, the most vile people of that part of the world. Incredibly vile. The things they did to people are unspeakable. The way they designed torture and pain. And yet God sent 2 prophets after them. He cares about everyone because he created you. So in Jeremiah, God invites Israel to return numerous times. I just found 5 of them just in chapters 3 and 4. So in chapter 3, verse 2, would you return to me, declares the Lord. He's asking a question. In verse 12, we just read, for he says, return, faithless Israel, declares the Lord. I will not frown on you any longer. I'm faithful. And he goes on and promises to bless them. And then when you get to verse 14, you see it again. Return, faithless people, declares the Lord, for I am your husband. The wedding imagery is all throughout the prophets. I will take care of you. Just return. Verse 22, he goes on, return, faithless people. I will cure you of backsliding. Just stop what you're doing. Just stop. Just stop. And turn this way. I'll take care of you. In chapter 4, verse 1, if you, Israel, will return, then return to me. And this is just in 2 chapters. This is, all the prophets are saying the same thing. Please, please, come back to the Lord. Come back to the Lord. What are you chasing after? Stop. Just stop. That's the message that permeates every one of these. Just stop. God says the reason is because I love you. I'm not going to give up on you. I don't care how horrible you are. I've said many times that Judas was a fool. Not because he betrayed Jesus. Peter did that. Because he committed suicide. There's no question in my mind. I'd love to see an extra chapter in John where Judas didn't do that. He went after Peter. Jesus did. He'd go after Judas. He loves every person he made them. So Jeremiah is prophesying over 40 years, 5 different kings, only one of which listened to him. But all the way through, his message is the same. He's pleading with people to return. All they need to do is simply come back to the one who showed them chesed all the way through. All the way through. And God makes a promise. He cannot violate his own promise, his own character, because of who he is. And so you see this pleading all the way through there. All they need to do is simply to turn back. He's ready to forgive that fast. He's ready to restore. He's ready to bless them generously. Malachi is the one time we're told that we're allowed to test God. Test me in this. Give the full tithe and see if I don't fill your barns to overflowing. And if you're afraid of giving, try it. Put him to the test. He's the one that said do it. Test him and see what happens. See what happens when you're generous. You're a generous church from my perspective. I've said this many times over the years. I mean, you could be greedy. You could be giving $10 and be worth $100 million. I don't know. That's between you and God. Okay? But if you really want to test God, you're allowed to do it. Then give. Just give more and see what happens. I don't need your money. God's going to take care of our church no matter what you do. This is for your benefit. And see what the Lord does. He loves this. So then, Jeremiah is then forced to watch the unthinkable. The unthinkable. The temple is destroyed. At the very end, this is how arrogant the people were. This is God's house. He will never destroy this temple. And he said, yeah, not only am I going to do that, but I'm going to wipe Jerusalem off the face of the earth. And I'm going to use the Babylonians to do it. He calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant. And then he says after he does it, 70 years later, I'm going to destroy the Babylonians for what they did. He has to watch that happen. In Ezekiel 10, we have one of the most sad chapters in the whole Bible. The seraphim in the Holy of Holies lifts up above the temple because Ezekiel asks, why did you leave? And he says, I'm going to let you see the temple the way I see it. And he opened his eyes and saw the blasphemy everywhere. So in Ezekiel 10, the seraphim lifts up, looks down at the temple, and then flies away. God left. Never came back until Jesus came. We have seen his glory, John 1. The glory left the temple and came back with Jesus. So why is God pleading with them? It's because of his chesed. In chapter 33, he lays it out. He does several times, but I just love this verse. Chapter 33, verse 11. Give thanks to the Lord Almighty, for the Lord is good. We've heard that refrain all through the Psalms. We saw Solomon singing it. Give thanks to the Lord Almighty, for the Lord is good. His love endures forever. It's because of his chesed. His commitment to love us is what compels us. It's like any good parent. You have to put up with a lot of stuff with your children as they grow up, don't they? But you committed to it. So did he. Even in the end, he pleads with them. Jeremiah also wrote Lamentations. Lamentations is one of the most destructive books there is. It's there in the final days, if not hours, before the Babylonians tear down the walls. Jerusalem's made of limestone, and the Babylonians know that, so they're catapulting these fire bombs, and when it hits limestone, it explodes. So there's dead bodies everywhere. They're eating the dead. They have no food. They're besieged. And he says to Jeremiah, don't pray for them anymore, or I'll punish you. They crossed the line. They're not going back. But what do you do about the few people that are stuck there, like Jeremiah? Probably Daniel, by the way. What do you do about those people who are faithful? They have to put up with it. They have to live with it. So God has a message for them right in the middle of this complete destruction. Lamentations chapter 3, verse 22. Because of the Lord's great chesed, we are not consumed. For his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. They had to put up with it. They had to put up with all the horror. But God had a message for them right smack in the middle. Right smack in the middle. I'm not going to read all of Jeremiah 31, but sadly as it is, his love was never reciprocated, never in any of the prophets. So God destroys the northern kingdom, then he destroys the southern kingdom. He promises that he would restore them. We call that the new covenant. That's captured in Jeremiah 31. It's a wonderful, wonderful new covenant. But he tells them there that he will forgive their sins. But what has to happen is he said, I'm going to send a root of Jesse. That's we know is Jesus. That's where that came from. David is from the offspring of Jesse, and so the tribe of Judah. And so Jesus is referred to as the root of Jesse. So he's going to send one who will forgive them. That's how much he loves us. Because he was entitled, he's perfectly within his rights to take everybody out. Kill us, destroy us. That was part of the covenant. They broke the covenant. So he said, I'm going to make a new covenant. And this covenant is going to be a little bit different. This covenant is going to be actualized by God himself. Because the first covenant was, if you obey me fully, I'll make you a kingdom of priests. Peter says, we are a kingdom of priests. What happened between, if you obey me fully, I'll make you a kingdom of priests, and we are a kingdom of priests. Old and New Testament, what happened in between? The cross. He fulfilled his promise, just like he said he would, based on his love. His son said, I'll go sacrifice for our people so they can see what this chesed really looks like. They have to see it. They don't believe it. They have to see it. For God loved the world so much. That's the Greek version in the New Testament of this word chesed. For God loved the world so much that he sent his only son to show us what this love really looks like. And that's what God asks us to be. So, what's in the way? We know what was in Israel because we can read all the prophets. I'm not a prophet. I don't know. I look in my own mirror. I don't look in your mirror. What's in the way of you turning back? Come back. Come back. Come back. That's all he asks. That's all he asks. Come back. He pleads all the way through the prophets. Come back, please. Come back. That's all it took. There's no other religion like this in the world where the gods say, just come back. That's how much I love you. I'll take care of you. Come back. What's keeping you from coming back? Father, thank you for your overwhelming goodness. You're pleased with us and you know us by name. All you ask is that we come back. Lord, I don't know what is in the hearts of these people here. I don't know what's distracting them. I don't know what's drawing them away. Don't know any of that. But you do. So Lord, help us to be a church that's a safe place to come back. When you walk through those doors, you can experience God's love in ways you haven't before. Help us to be that kind of church. And help each of us, including me, to always come back. In your Son's name, Jesus, our high priest, thank you for sacrificing yourself for us. We pray. Amen.